Dillian the Body Snatcher right here. It's a champ. Big up to Sporting Icon. Subscribe. Otherwise, I might pay you guys a visit.
So my favourite heavyweight of all time was Lennox Lewis. Now, I remember many of Lennox Lewis's fights. I went as far, even though I was very young, I even went as far as to ask my mum on quite a few occasions that when Lennox Lewis was fighting on, say, pay-per-view, for example, mum, could we get the pay-per-view and I'll give you the money back? I had like a paper round in that at the time, and I'll give like my 2 weeks' wages worth of pay-per-view just to pay for that £10 worth of pay-per-view, or however much it was. So Lennox Lewis, I loved Lennox Lewis, and in my opinion, the greatest heavyweight of all time. That's a dubious, arguable point, that's for sure. And many of you guys will be able to take me to school when it comes to either defending that statement or going against that statement. Because many of you can break down many of the greats' resumes that I couldn't. For me, I know I'm okay with history, but I wouldn't be as good as quite a lot of you. Whereas you can probably break down the resume of Muhammad Ali to its finest point. I could break down and talk about the key moments, the key fights and things like that. Of course, I know about the likes of George Foreman, Rocky Marciano and people like that, but I'm not extensive on them. So don't take my opinion that he's the greatest heavyweight of all time as he is the greatest heavyweight of all time and I'm standing my ground. Not at all, it's just my opinion. But I loved Lennox Lewis, and even though, of course, I was a kid, but Lennox Lewis was, for me, phenomenal. He's absolutely phenomenal, and I was gutted for him, of course, when he lost to Oliver McCall, gutted again when he lost to Hasim Rahman, but ecstatic when he finally got back in the ring with each of these and done what he'd done to him. In fact, I remember Oliver McCall crying. It's the first time I've ever seen such a thing. I remember a brutal knockout of Hasim Rahman. I remember the two fights with Evander Holyfield where he got screwed in the first fight. I remember him taking on, of course, Mike Tyson. Of course, most people will know about that fight. Of course, his final fight with Vitaly Klitschko. But the very first time I think I ever heard of Lennox Lewis, because I didn't watch Olympics and that back then, so I didn't really know who Lennox Lewis was. And of course, with him, say, representing Canada, I wouldn't have taken too much notice anyway. Okay, I'd have probably just been watching some track and field with like my mum, with like, Linford Christie and whoever else was around back then. But the first time I really heard of him a little bit, I suppose, was when he fought and defeated Gary Mason. But then I really heard him again quite a lot because my dad was a huge Glenn McCrory fan. Glenn McCrory is from our neck of the woods up here in the northeast of England. So that's really the first time that he really became to my attention as to who is this Lennox Lewis guy. My dad never really liked Lennox Lewis anyway, much like a lot of the country back then, of what I remember, because he used to call him, well, my dad would call him a Yankee, meaning an American, right? Even though he wasn't, and he represented Canada. That just kind of goes to show the limited knowledge of my dad. But here in the UK, see, we couldn't really tell the difference between an American accent and a Canadian accent. And I know that's going to be a bit taboo to hear for quite a few people, and it's not meant as an offence, but here we can't really tell the difference too much, other than in America, you guys will say bro, in Canada, you say mate, okay? But we can't really tell the difference, much like you probably can't tell the difference in the accent for, say, a Londoner compared to an Australian or from New Zealand. You probably can't tell the difference, whereas we can. It's just that kind of thing. So my dad and many other people didn't really take to Lennox Lewis. They felt that he was a bit of a traitor by representing Canada at the Olympics and not Great Britain. But of course, when he turned pro, he's wearing the Union Jack, he's doing all that kind of thing. And I do remember him, since the Glenn McCrory fight, taking on the likes of Razor Ruddock and Tony Tucker and Shannon Briggs, even Tommy Morrison, and I used to like Tommy Morrison and that, and many of the fighters. Henry Akawande, in fact, wasn't he the WBO heavyweight champion? And didn't he have to vacate that belt to go fight Lennox Lewis or something like that? I might be wrong. Some of you will be able to correct me on that. But I loved Lennox Lewis. I really did. And his win over David Tua was, for me, great, because a lot of people were quite high on David Tua back then. Anyway, that is what it is. So the most important part for me was that I identified with him as British. Even though a lot of the country didn't. Frank Bruno, he was the poster boy. Frank Bruno, actually my highlight of my boxing journey, if you like, as a fan, was when Frank Bruno won the WBC Heavyweight World Championship by defeating Oliver McCall. That feeling I've yet to replicate since that moment. That was the highlight of my boxing journey, I suppose, as a boxing fan. So I loved Frank Bruno, even though I did kind of see Frank Bruno as a pantomime character and going on stage with Freddie Starr doing some sketches and on the Des O'Connor show and things like that. So of course, that's kind of how I saw Frank Bruno. Don't get me wrong, of course I did watch him fight once in a while, but Lennox Lewis was the one for me. Now, him being British, and I know I was in a minority here, but I mean, I think eventually Britain started to accept him, but he really had to work hard at it, much harder than most other people had to. But again, I understand why. But for me, Lennox Lewis was phenomenal, and I love Lennox Lewis. And him becoming undisputed heavyweight champion 1999, defeating Evander Holyfield in a rematch where, let's be honest, he won the first fight, but he got the decision in the rematch, undisputed. Now, did he even defend the undisputed? I don't think he even did. But either way, he was undisputed. And now, how many years later? 22 years later, we still don't have an undisputed champion. So Lennox Lewis was the last undisputed heavyweight world champion, and British. Now, again, back then, you didn't need the WBO. The WBO was around, but it wasn't considered a major belt. So to become undisputed, you needed the WBC, the WBA, and the IBF. They were the three belts that you needed to become undisputed. Just three belts. But of course, he would hold on to the Ring magazine and lineal status. Many people consider him to be the last true lineal heavyweight champion of the world because, of course, he never lost it. And anything since then is all hearsay and conjecture and whatever else. And the only way to get a true lineal now is for the next heavyweight champion to become undisputed. That's what a lot of people will say, that Lennox Lewis was the last one and the next one has to be undisputed. Hey, that's a point for you guys to argue. But the point is of this video, Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury. Both of these guys British. So the last undisputed guy was British. I know Canadians claim him. I know Lennox Lewis claims that, of course, his mother is British, his father is Canada, and his heart kind of somewhat is Jamaican or whatever it may be. But at the end of the day, he's British, and people can claim him all they want. You can change a passport, you can change an accent, you can't change a birth certificate. That's the truth. So anyway, the last undisputed heavyweight champion of the world was British, Lennox Lewis. The next undisputed heavyweight champion of the world in those 22 years, going to be British, right? Tyson Fury or Anthony Joshua. So this is what I say to you guys. Does it really matter who wins? Does it truly matter which one wins? You can take a side, you can pick a side, you can think who's going to win, you can say who you want to win. Hey, it is what it is, but ultimately, if you're British, does it really matter? Now, I know when I say that I'm biased British, quite a few people seem to think that I'm anti-Brit, or, sorry, anti-non-Brit, or anything like that. That's not true. Some of my favourite fighters of all time were not British. Many of them, in fact, most of them, to be honest with you. And even today, a lot of my favourite fighters are not British. But even my favourite fighter can go in with, say, a Brit, and I may not like that Brit too much. I may not rate that Brit too much. But on that particular night, I'm going to want the Brit to win. I can't help it. It's just how I've grown up, like watching the football, watching England at the World Cups and the European Championships and things like that. It's just part of my DNA, I suppose. But ultimately, Tyson Fury and Anthony Joshua, they're both Brits. So quite why the divide and the hatred between the two fans is beyond me. It truly is beyond me. Now, unless, of course, you know Anthony Joshua personally or you know Tyson Fury personally, I don't really know why you're getting so het up about things. Because I see it in the comment section all the time. Just pure hatred for the other one because they favour one. For what sense? For what reason? Some people will use certain situations as a way to fuel their anger towards Anthony Joshua with the Black Lives Matter and wherever else. Some people will fuel their natural dislike of Tyson Fury, but use it as an excuse when he speaks about the Travel Lives Matters or things of the past of when he won the world title. I'm not going to go into some of the things that he said, but some people will still hold him or his toes to the fire since that moment. They'll use that as a way to say, that's why I don't like you. Maybe it's much deeper than that for either fighter, I don't know. But for me, they're British. And you should be proud. If you're British, you should be proud that you've got two Brits fighting for undisputed. It's never happened before. Probably never going to happen before. Again. Hopefully it does, right? But there's a good chance that it won't. Which is why I think a lot of people want the fight to be on UK soil. Because, again, it's a once in a moment lifetime that may never ever get a chance to have it again. So have it here in the UK, crowd or no crowd. But it is what it is. It's money, it's business. But for me, they're British. Who's going to win makes no difference. The fact is, the winner is going to be holding up the British flag, the Union Jack, correct? Okay, I know some people say, well, Anthony Joshua, you know, he's got heritage from Nigeria. Well, Tyson Fury, he's got Irish heritage. Well, that's just being petty. At the end of the day, both of these guys represented Great Britain as amateurs. Anthony Joshua represented Great Britain in the Olympics, won the Olympic gold. Tyson Fury, yes, I know he wanted to represent Ireland, but Ireland wouldn't allow him to do so because his roots weren't strong enough to be considered to be able to represent Ireland. So that will tell you he's British, okay? But that's the important thing. So while you may have a horse in the race and you may want one fighter to win over the other one, ultimately, for me, I'm proud of both of these guys. What they have achieved is phenomenal. Now, bearing in mind, Lennox Lewis, when he won the Undisputed title, he was on his 33rd professional fight. 33rd. Anthony Joshua, this will be his 26th professional fight if he was to become undisputed. If Tyson Fury was to become undisputed, this would be on his 32nd fight. So both of these guys would have done it quicker than Lennox Lewis. Of course, Tyson Fury, he's the only heavyweight currently to have won every single heavyweight belt that there is possible to get. In fact, he may be the only one in history, actually. But of course, we can add in the domestic titles for, say, the British, the Commonwealth, the European and that as well. But Tyson Fury has never held them all at the same time, as in the major sanctioning body. So he's not undisputed. As much as he's held all the belts before and he's still undefeated and he never lost them in the ring, well, again, let's be serious. You can't lose them in the ring if you're not fighting. Okay? You can't just hold on to the belts and until what, you decide to come back. But either way, that doesn't matter. Again, whether you consider Tyson Fury lineal or whether you don't, it doesn't really matter. Him against Joshua, the winner will be legitimately lineal. Correct? The winner will legitimately have all of the belts. There will be not one belt out there in the heavyweight division that either one can go and hold in addition to what they'll be having on that particular fight night. They'll even have the IBO belt. In fact, Lennox Lewis, he held the IBO belt as well. Again, that was considered a bigger belt than the WBO back then, but it wasn't still one of the major sanctioning bodies. It was an important belt back then. Nowadays, it's no more fitting than an area title, is it, to be honest with you? But even so, that belt will also be on the line. Everything is on the line on this particular fight. Everything. So if you're British and if you're proud Brit and anything like that, you should be happy that both of these guys are fighting each other. You may have a horse in the race. You may like one more than the other. It is what it is. But ultimately, in my opinion, it doesn't really matter who wins that fight. For me, we can say the last undisputed heavyweight champion of the world was a Brit, Lennox Lewis. 22 years later, the next heavyweight champion of the world will be British. 22 years have passed in that time frame, and we haven't had an undisputed since. The Klitschko's had heavyweight division on lockdown for the majority of that. But of course, they're not going to fight each other, obviously being brothers. There were other opportunities, of course. Deontay Wilder, of course, had the prime opportunity to become undisputed. He could have fought Anthony Joshua, but he turned down numerous offers, all the way up to 100 million, right? He could have had the opportunity. Whether or not he would have won made no difference. He had the opportunity to do so. He had the opportunity when he first won the belt on 33 fights, because Shelley Finkel was managing Deontay Wilder and Vladimir Klitschko. Vladimir Klitschko wanted to fight. I don't know whether or not Wilder wanted to fight or not. I have no idea, but Shelley Finkel didn't want to fight. So that didn't happen. So now we've had to wait all this time. And for some people, you weren't even around when Lennox Lewis was undisputed champion back in 1999. So this is a unique moment. This is a moment that will go down in history of course, world boxing. But most importantly for us biased Brits, of course, British history. Two Brits fighting together for undisputed in the glamour division, the heavyweight division. Drop your thoughts below, click thumbs up, subscribe, catch you on the next video.